So there's this old quote by Karl von Clausewitz that I really like. If you're having a shitty day, just remember that you're someone's reason to masturbate. Wait, that's the wrong quote. There was something about tactics and strategy or something to that effect, which is, I guess, sort of a segue into what I actually wanted to talk about today. Symphony of War Nephilim Saga is another tactics game, and maybe it's just me, but it feels like tactics games have been becoming a bigger thing in these last few years. I remember back in the 2000s when your options were Fire Emblem, Tactics Arena Online, Disgaea, or if you were really desperate, Final Fantasy Tactics. But now it seems like you can't swing a cat without hitting a tactics game. I think it started with the reboot of XCOM UFO Defense, or UFO Enemy Unknown, depending on where you are in the world. Or maybe it was from the rising popularity of Fire Emblem, starting with Awakening. But now we have our pick of the litter from games like Dark Deity, a game with strong gameplay, a moderate and meandering story, and very buggy. Lost Eidolons, a game with strong gameplay, a moderate and meandering story with a little less bugs. And now we have Symphony of War, a game with strong gameplay, a moderate and meandering story, and definitely a few bugs to work out. And of course we just got Fire Emblem Engage, a game with strong gameplay, a moderate and meandering story, and I'm starting to sense a bit of a trend with tactics games. But regardless, today we're here to talk about Symphony of War. If you haven't heard of it, then you probably don't play as many indie games as I do, or if you have heard of it, then you would know it's a game available on Steam developed by Dancing Dragon Studios. It's very clearly influenced by Fire Emblem, which, as I just discussed, many tactics games seem to be nowadays, but it adds a nice twist to the formula in the gameplay, which we'll talk more about later when we get into that, but for now, let's just do a quick rundown of the story. The story begins in a relatively generic fantasy world where a giant continent only consists of about 4 or 5 kingdoms, and civil war is brewing among the home kingdom of the main character, which I swear has a name, but for the life of me I can't remember it and distinguish it from all the other names that this game was throwing at me very early on. In any case, you, the main character, are initially on the side of the Empire until events transpire that force you to change sides, naturally, to join the rebellion after several tutorial chapters. And I do mean several, like 8 to 10. Man, this really is starting to sound more and more like a Fire Emblem game every minute. But unfortunately, the main character does come back at what feels like the halfway point of the game. And now, the real story can actually begin. As you take your fight to the Empire, you need to collect a bunch of ancient relics, and then you defeat the evil Emperor and save the world. Like I said, pretty mundane, pretty generic. The story really just seems to drag on and on and on, but thankfully we're here for the gameplay, and Symphony of War delivers. It hits all the Fire Emblem beats. You have support conversations with characters at base, you have a class system that requires you to upgrade your units and move around the battlefield with your units to attack enemy units until you eventually seize the throne. If anything, this is one of the biggest love letters to Fire Emblem since Dark Deity. But enough about that, let's get into the meat of the gameplay, as that's really the only thing this game has going for it. While the tactics of this game will feel incredibly familiar to anyone who has played games such as Fire Emblem or Dark Deity or even Lost Eidolons, the big selling point on the game is instead of controlling individual units, you control squads. This allows for you to have squads that are designed to be incredibly tanky, squads that are capable to heal very efficiently, squads that can output insane amounts of damage, or anywhere in between. It's all based on which units you assign to which squad. The classes all feel unique, except for maybe 2 of them, which are basically the same, and I find myself spending hours in the prep screen, redesigning and redistributing my units to form powerful squads to bring to the next battle. It also helps that this game actually allows you to use dragons, like Fire Emblem did once upon a time. It even has a special cat race for all the furries out there. The class level up system is also rather interesting since, unlike Fire Emblem, haha, didn't expect that one, did you? There are actually 2 types of XP. Unit XP tracks your individual unit's class, while class XP tracks their mastery of a class. Once they reach mastery of a class, they're eligible to promote into a more powerful class. This requires a handful of resources that you've collected. These resources are collected within a chapter by capturing resource nodes on the map. It's a rather interesting and engaging system that means you can have multiple side objectives on any given map. In addition to these resources, you will also need to collect gold to purchase additional units, as well as special artifacts and items from the marketplace. Artifacts are used to augment the stats of a squad, while items are used to augment the individual within the squad. If I had to cite some of my more damning complaints, it would be that, on any given difficulty, the game feels a little too easy. Many of the maps can be beaten well within the time limit, while simultaneously obtaining all side objectives and defeating all the enemies on the map. My other biggest complaint would be that the game never seems to stop tutorializing new mechanics. Even after the opening tutorial chapters, you still get new mechanics dumped on you for several chapters, up until around the 20 mark or so. It's like the devs kept thinking of new things to add to the game and just threw them in at whatever part of the game they were developing at the time. Not that it's a bad thing to have access to all these mechanics, I do enjoy them, it just makes the game feel bloated. But overall, the game hits all the right notes, and I can highly recommend it to anyone who enjoys any tactics game, but again, specifically Fire Emblem. There are definitely many bugs that still need to be worked out of this game, despite it being in a full release, which could knot certain people. It definitely bothers me a bit, but I'll give it a pass, only because it's an indie title, and as far as I can find, the first title released by the studio. And hell, they're probably going to patch them out eventually. So that's Symphony of War in a nutshell. Give it a shot if you got the time. And speaking of time, I think I've wasted enough of your guys's. So I'm going to get out of here. See you later.